Hello, my name is David Allen, the board chairman, CEO of Museum of Jazz and Art. And I have here Mr. Greg Bridges, a passionate jazz leader and communicator and jazz activist. And Greg, if you can introduce yourself to the audience here for those who may not know you.
Well, as David mentioned, my name is Greg Bridges. I am an Oakland native, born and raised in Oakland, and have been in love with the city all of my life. I've worked in jazz radio for nearly 30 years, beginning at KJazz, the legendary jazz station that was this nation's first 24-hour jazz station. I moved from KJazz on to KCSM, where I am now, and KPFA, where I also do a couple of shows. I've worked as a jazz journalist, writing for Jazz Now magazines and having my works published in various publications. I've been a jazz presenter, presenting house concerts under the name of Grapes and Grooves with a partner of mine, Julian Carroll. I've hosted many jazz events and booked for performers. I've worked in this music in many various capacities.
Oh, great, Greg. You mentioned Julian Carroll, man. That's an old friend of mine. I haven't seen him in a long time. We could talk about that later. The audience is going to be introduced to three things tonight. One, the mission and the vision. And then number two, the importance of preserving jazz history. And we're also going to be discussing number three, community participation and benefit. Now, I know that second part, the importance of preserving jazz history, has always been important to you since I've been talking to you about the Museum of Jazz and Art.
Indeed.
As a member of Museum of Jazz and Art's Advisory Board, could you speak a little on jazz preservation importance in general?
The importance of jazz history to me is, well, there are a few angles to that importance. One is to know the history itself, to know the musicians who helped create this music, and to realize that although we hear about one part of the history, there were other things going on at the same time. Oakland has had a big place in jazz history, although it's not as well documented. There were numerous clubs in Oakland where musicians would come and play and stay. There were numerous musicians who've come out of Oakland, who've gone on to much greatness in this music, or who've had lengthy, stellar careers, going as far back as folks like Richard Wyans, the well-known pianist who appeared on many prestige recordings. Jerome Richardson, a multi-reed artist who plays baritone, tenor, saxophone, and has also appeared on many recordings, notably for Prestige Records. There's the great Ed Kelly, who not only himself was a great musician, but was an educator and inspiration for many other great musicians who've come out of this area. The preservation of this history is one that should be taken seriously, because without that preservation, a lot of these names will go unknown. The history will be written without them being included. The history will be written without Oakland being included, which would be a tragedy.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Can you talk a little bit about the stories behind, or just pick one story behind, say an Oakland history?
I have, I have some great memories. In Oakland, on 7th Street in West Oakland, that was one of the premier spots for music and entertainment, especially for black culture and black residents of this city. There was Slim Jenkins' place. There was Esther's Orbit Room. There were restaurants around the area. There were other entertainment venues. Those places are gone now, other than Esther's Orbit Room. Those places are gone now due to what was called urban renewal, which in some senses looked like urban removal. The place where the new
Yes.
Oakland Post Office is, or the Oakland Post Office, the main post office down on 7th Street, is one of the buildings that came up that necessitated the removal of some of the businesses down there. The BART station that was put down around 7th Street is another one of the entities that popped up that forced a lot of businesses to either close or move and change the look and feel of the area. But some of my biggest memories of music here in Oakland involves my father, Oliver Johnson, who was a jazz drummer born and raised in Oakland, who was a big part of the free jazz scene, or quote-unquote avant-garde jazz scene, which was going on in San Francisco during the mid-60s. My dad, Oliver, played and recorded with Denny Zeitlin's group. He was on Denny Zeitlin's first recording, Zeitgeist. He was part of the house band at the Both End in San Francisco, which included folks like George Duke and Raphael Garrett, who both went on to greater acclaim in the music. He was friends with the legendary John Handy, who I've come to know later in life and hear many great stories about this area and this music from. You know, my memories and my thoughts of Oakland don't involve just one story, but involve a story that is still continuing.
I think that's absolutely wonderful because stories can be included into chapters and chapters into books and books into preserving the history. Now I know that B.B. King, Nat King Cole, Louis Jordan, Sammy Davis all visited Oakland back in the day. Earl Father Hines, right.
Charles Brown moved here.
Charles Brown, that's right. The lyricist, yes, Charles Brown.
There were so many musicians who have moved to Oakland, even if they didn't perform in Oakland. Oakland became a part of their lives. And, it's really important not just to preserve the history, but to tell the stories that are continuing here in Oakland.
Yes.
I mean, you have musicians today like Angela Wellman, who runs the Oakland Public Conservatory of Music, which is here to make sure that a lot of young kids who are coming up in Oakland have the opportunity to get their hands on instruments and have the opportunity to interact with professional musicians. There was Khalil Shahid of Oaktown Jazz, who had that same goal in mind. I mean, Khalil and I first met through his Jazzmobile. Khalil would ride through neighborhoods in Oakland, neighborhoods where a lot of youth didn't have the opportunity to go to jazz concerts or didn't have the opportunity to see, musicians up close in person. Khalil made that a part of his mission. Ravi Abkarian, who continues Oaktown Jazz to this day, with that same mission in mind that was started by Khalil. Man, there are so many stories, and I feel like to try and tell one, I would be forgetting another. Yeah. So I don't want to leave anybody out. I just want people to understand the importance of preserving the history of this music in this area, Oakland, and recognizing that by preserving the history, we're also allowing others to continue that story.
Well, yeah, this is actually great because now I'm hearing stories that I never heard of. So I'm learning something as well. And, MOJA plan on having other discussions throughout the year with regards to education, cultural identity of jazz itself, jazz from Africa, from Europe, Latin America, and Asia, and some of the great players that are playing here today.
David, I would like to also thank you for being the catalyst for something like this. A lot of people, even those that are from Oakland, don't recognize the history and the contribution that Oakland has made to this music called jazz. We don't always recognize and acknowledge the contributions that Oakland has made to the blues. And because those contributions and that history isn't taught in schools, a lot of our youth are coming up without knowing the greatness from which they come. So I appreciate that you're the catalyst behind doing this, because it not only, as I mentioned, it not only preserves the history of what has happened, but it allows folks to learn from that history and see that they have a place in continuing that story. So again, thank you, and thanks for all of you who are showing your support for MOJA, Museum of Oakland Jazz and Arts, and let's get it rolling.
Let's get it rolling. Hey, thank you again.